does the research say about public funding of private schools? I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. If you're interested in educational policy, please like and subscribe. So the term charter school wasn't founded until the 1990s because that's when this concept began in the United States. And in the United States, what a charter school is it's a school that is paid for with public money, but it has independence. So the school may be have a slightly different curriculum. The school has its own hiring practices and its own policies as far as discipline and academics. But ultimately, it's paid for with public money. And there's been a lot of controversy over charter schools in the United States. But actually, the idea is really, really old. So, and especially in Europe, charter schools have been around for a long, long time. So, in Belgium and the Netherlands, most private schools are publicly funded, and they have been for over 100 years. And also in France, there's some private schools. In Australia, there's private schools. Many of these schools have religious backgrounds. They're based with religion. So a parent would choose if they want their child to go to a Catholic school or a Protestant school. Europe, in most cases, does not have the distinction between church and state that they do in the United States. It's a very different form of government. And there are different rules for these schools, but generally the schools choose the students they want, but they have some kind of accountability system. So the students will take the state test required, which are not nearly as extensive as the test here. And there might be some kind of inspection system where the state can come in and look at these schools and shut them down if they are not producing good academic results. And in the Netherlands, 69% of students are in these private schools. It's a very large amount of students. And Sweden actually started a system, and they call it a voucher system, but it's actually pretty similar to the idea of charter schools, because the money goes with the students, but these schools all take money from students. They only take voucher students, and the schools cannot charge more than that voucher's worth, which is a big issue in the United States, which I'm going to talk about in a future video, about private schools who charge more than what the money the student gets, which is a big controversy. And so in Sweden, it began in 1992. And so that's a little bit later, and it's really hard to quantify the effect of these schools in other parts of Europe because they have been around for so long, even before there was a lot of standardized testing to look at scores. But in Sweden, it began in 1992. And what they found was that the schools, they call them independent schools or private schools, there was a very small difference. The students did slightly better in these schools, but it wasn't a very significant difference. And the other thing they found was that there was intense segregation in these schools. So basically by socioeconomic status. So the private schools were largely filled with richer students. And again, if the schools can choose who they want to choose, they're going to choose the richer students. During this time, there was a very big drop in Sweden's test scores. Traditionally, Sweden was very, very good, one of the best in the world as far as its school system. And after 1992, there was gradually a really big drop until the early 2000s. The students are doing a little bit better, but it's still not back to where it was before. So there's kind of consensus that in Sweden, this was not a good idea. But Sweden still has that program. And it was actually the biggest decline of any country in the world during that time. And Sweden also has low levels of accountability. So there's not a lot of people looking at these schools and what they're doing. And in the United States, charter schools, in 2020, there were 44 states that had charter schools, and I think the number is probably even higher now. And they're relatively small numbers of students. It's only about 6% of students who attend charter schools. And in the United States, by law, the laws vary greatly in the state, but generally there's a lottery for students. So by law, the school's supposed to be open to anyone, and parents put their child into this lottery, and children are randomly chosen for the slots at the school. But there's really not that. It's still not exactly random, because parents who choose charter schools tend to be wealthier and to have more education. They're parents who are typically dissatisfied with the public schools. And so it leads to really big forms of segregation in schools. Charter schools are usually very, very segregated, with mostly white, mostly middle and upper class students attending charter schools. And according to this study I read, only about 2% of schools, charter schools, have racial and socioeconomic integration. So again, very much segregated. There are some charter schools who do better, and these tend to be the no excuses schools. So these are schools that are mostly found in poorer neighborhoods, or maybe neighborhoods with a lot of minority enrollment, and they're very strict. So they have a lot of rules, like especially about work completion and discipline, and they expect every child to go to college. They have really, really high standards. Those schools do show better results for the most part, but a lot of students who aren't good students will either not choose to go to those schools because they're so hard, or they'll leave. That's pretty common. The students will just leave. And I personally have seen some really interesting things with charter schools with students who are very vulnerable. So here in South Carolina, there are a lot of charter schools, particularly in the Charleston area. And those schools typically don't have resources for students who have something unique going on, particularly English learners. Special education is at the point where that's kind of mainstream in schools. People know about it. People don't know about English learning. So I've seen multiple students come in from charter schools who know very little English and have been in these schools for a very long time, and they did not receive any specialized instruction at all. Because again, the schools are independent. They usually don't have to follow all the policies that public schools have to follow. So I've seen some really sad stories of kids who come from charter schools. That being said, the research, according to NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, there was no significant difference between public schools and charter schools in their scores. So yeah, that's basically what it is. There's academically, they're not often better, and they often cause things like school segregation, which actually hurts the public schools, because then those schools are, not as well funded, and they don't have the diversity they need, particularly socioeconomic diversity, to receive what they need. Unfortunately, we still live in a world where money talks, and if those schools no longer have any middle class or upper class students, those schools sometimes tend to be overlooked, which is just unfortunate, and it's not the way it should be. But we live in a society, unfortunately, that's what counts, and that's what's considered important is money, unfortunately. So that's all I have for today. Thank you, and until next time, keep learning.